The late summer air of 1981 still hung heavy and humid when Megan Hartley vanished from Richardson, Texas, a quiet community tucked right beside the Prairie Creek Trail. The pale yellow streetlights flickered over the pavement as the 16-year-old left the library at 9:10 p.m., clutching a few borrowed books. From the window of a nearby house, an elderly woman watched Megan cross the small front yard toward the trail, her ponytail bouncing lightly in the breeze. Megan's bright-colored top was the last splash of color as she moved into the darkness beneath the cottonwoods and disappeared around the bend that led to the little wooden bridge. What happened in the next hour or so would leave Richardson haunted by fear, suspicion, and a mystery that lingered for the next 42 years. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the latest cases. Richardson, Texas, a late summer evening in 1981. The stifling air clung to the ground like the hot breath of a day that refused to end, leaving the stones along Prairie Creek Trail faintly warm to the touch. Towering cottonwoods lined the narrow path, leaning in the gentle breeze and casting long shadows that stretched across the walkway like endless black ribbons laid out to guide someone or something. The sickly yellow streetlights blinked on and off, throwing patchy light onto the pavement that made every footstep seem slower, longer, and stranger than it really was. In that hushed stillness, 16-year-old Megan Hartley appeared like a slender stroke against the dim backdrop. She hugged a few books to her chest as she left the Richardson Public Library after a study group. Her light-colored top stood out against the darkness, a moving point of brightness among the trees. Megan stepped onto the familiar trail she had walked countless times before, a path wrapped in the soft murmur of the creek below and the steady rustle of leaves overhead. On any other night, the trail felt safe, a comfortable part of suburban life. But tonight the air felt heavier, slower, as if Prairie Creek Trail knew something Megan didn't. A few walkers later said they had seen Megan from a distance, the bright flash of her shirt moving steadily between the trunks. Her pace neither rushed nor completely relaxed. They couldn't recall her face clearly, only that something felt slightly off, maybe the way she pulled her arms in close when a stronger gust hit, or how the flickering streetlight ahead made her silhouette seem to dissolve into the dark and then reappear. The gentle sounds of the evening were suddenly broken by something odd, the low rumble of a car moving slowly somewhere in the distance, the raspy growl of an old engine trying to stay quiet. A dog in a nearby yard barked non-stop toward the trail, the sound dragging on as if the animal sensed something humans couldn't see. They were just fragments of darkness, faint echoes, but together they created a vague feeling that Megan wasn't entirely alone. She reached the curve that led down to the little wooden bridge, the spot where streetlight barely reached. That stretch was darker than anywhere else on the route, set apart like a pocket of silence. As Megan walked into the pool of shadow beneath the trees, her outline gradually melted into the night. The walkers only saw her up to that point. After that there was no more movement. She simply vanished beyond the bend. Inside the Hartley home, time passed with unnatural slowness. At first the family assumed Megan was staying late at the library or had stopped by a friend's house without telling anyone. But as the minutes ticked by, normal worry turned into anxiety. Calls to friends yielded nothing. The library confirmed she had left early. No one knew where she was. The silence of the evening only thickened the dread. After hours of waiting, faint hope gave way to sharp, unmistakable fear. Finally the family could wait no longer. They picked up the phone, called the Richardson Police Department, and reported that Megan Hartley was missing. The next morning, as the first Texas sunlight spilled over the rooftops of Richardson, Prairie Creek Trail still carried a lingering chill from the night, quiet, as if it were guarding a secret no one could quite grasp. The Richardson Police Department sent a small team to the trail. Starting from the last point the family confirmed Megan usually passed. Patrol cars lined the curb, their yellow lights reflecting off the still damp pavement, while officers quietly set out marker tape and swept the area section by section. The path to the little bridge, where Megan had disappeared into darkness the night before, was brighter now, yet even daylight couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that hung over the place. The officers walked in a line, eyes scanning the ground, every branch, every open patch. They searched the way they always did for personal items, disturbed vegetation, anything that didn't belong on a peaceful trail. Neighbors who were walking dogs or watering lawns began to notice the unusual police activity. A few approached cautiously and asked what was going on. No one gave a clear answer, but the worry on their faces mirrored what the whole neighborhood had quietly realized overnight. Megan hadn't come home. After nearly an hour sweeping from the entrance to the big curve by the large tree, a young officer spotted the first thing: a notebook lying off the path, its cover smeared with dirt and one corner bent as if lightly stepped on. It was tucked beneath the low branches of a bush, easy to miss unless you were looking closely. The officer crouched, picked it up with gloved hands, and flipped it open gently. Megan Hartley was written in the top corner in the rounded, neat handwriting typical of teenage girls, still fresh ink. No signs of a struggle, no tears, no unexplained stains. It had simply been left behind. But the question hit immediately: why here, a few steps off the trail, in a spot Megan had no reason to enter? The notebook was sealed, labeled as evidence, and sent to the lab. Police widened the search. They crossed the little wooden bridge, checked both banks of the creek where the water flowed quietly and reflected the pale golden sunlight. There were no clear signs Megan had been dragged or fallen in. No deep shoe prints, no crushed grass, no scrap of her clothing. Everything was suspiciously clean. Too clean to believe nothing had happened. From a distance, the Hartley family stood off to the side, watching the first steps of the search in silence. They didn't want to interfere or distract the officers, but their eyes followed every movement, waiting for a word, a sign, anything that might mean Megan had simply wandered off. Yet even though police hadn't found clear evidence of a crime, they knew this scene, a high school girl walking home who vanished from a familiar trail, couldn't be taken lightly. The first suspicions were noted in reports, initial observations organized into a timeline, but it still wasn't enough to say anything for certain. By noon, Prairie Creek Trail was crisscrossed with yellow tape, radio chatter filled the air steadily, and the list of people to interview kept growing. Yet the only thing police had at that moment was one cold, simple fact: Megan Hartley had left no trace of where she went, who she met, or why she didn't come home. The dropped notebook was the only clue, fragile, faint, and answering none of the big questions. The search expanded, but the biggest question of that morning still hung heavy in the air. How does a 16-year-old girl disappear on a stretch of path less than a 10-minute walk from home? From noon onward, with the initial search still yielding no answers, Richardson PD shifted full focus to reconstructing the exact route Megan had walked the night before. Investigators started at the Richardson Public Library, where she left carrying her books. They stood on the steps she had descended, noting the direction she usually took, the spacing of the streetlights, blind corners, and stretches where trees blocked more light than usual. Their goal was to recreate as accurately as possible what Megan saw, heard, and felt along that path. Officers went door to door along the library to trail route. Some residents said they hadn't seen anyone because they turned in early. A few vaguely recalled seeing a young figure pass by, but weren't sure it was Megan. What especially caught police attention was this: no one saw Megan leave the trail. In a small area with plenty of houses nearby and regular evening walkers, the fact that nobody saw her emerge near the residential streets was highly unusual. It was as if Megan vanished right on the trail, before reaching the lit neighborhood. To firm up the timeline, investigators examined every segment: the dimly lit wooden bridge, the curving bend where branches hung low, creating natural pockets of darkness, and the section near the old red brick house with its weathered wooden fence, places Megan had to pass to get home. At each spot, everything looked untouched, like any normal evening. No trampled grass, nothing dropped except the notebook found that morning. The scene felt too pristine, too no trace, and it made the team uneasy. While canvassing houses, one family living near the trail's bend said they heard rapid footsteps around the time they were watching TV the previous night. The husband and wife both recalled the thump 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 of someone running on the path, then an abrupt stop, followed by several seconds of unnatural silence. They stressed there was no scream, no cry for help, just hurried running. They hadn't checked because they figured it was kids messing around, or someone jogging late. Though not certain it was connected to Megan, it was the only specific sound police had from the night she disappeared, and it matched the location where Megan's figure vanished from sight. The command team immediately marked the spot in front of that family's house on the map as priority search point 1. Next, police focused on the area directly beneath the wooden bridge, where the creek ran, and where a few walkers reported seeing flickering light the night before. That section had thick overhanging branches that easily blocked views, and was far enough from houses that small sounds wouldn't carry. It became priority search point 2. Finally, about 20 meters north of the trail, there was a low-lying patch leading into dense brush. An officer passing by noted the dry leaves looked lightly disturbed, though not enough to be certain anyone had walked there. Still, since it wasn't on Megan's normal route, the team marked it as priority search point 3 in case someone had pulled her off the path. As the sun climbed higher, search teams fanned out around those 3 points in small groups, carefully checking every meter of ground, every bush, every tiny stream. They looked for any sign, footprints, fabric scraps, torn paper, drag marks, dropped items, but everything seemed to have vanished with Megan. That unsettling feeling, the silent disappearance, was starting to tell investigators this might be far more complicated than a lost teenager. But at that moment, with the midday heat rising and the 3 priority zones still revealing nothing concrete, they didn't yet have enough to declare anything. The one thing everyone felt the same was this: Prairie Creek Trail, so peaceful, so quiet, seemed to be hiding something. And that secret lay somewhere along the route Megan walked on her final night. When sweeping Megan's last known route still turned up no clear signs, Richardson PD shifted focus to anyone who had been near Prairie Creek Trail the evening she vanished. The area was popular for evening walks, dog walking, or simple strolls after dinner, so police believed at least someone must have accidentally seen something important. They went house to house around the trail, asking each person what they had seen, heard, or sensed the night before. Slowly, 3 statements stood out, each small but distinct, like 3 scattered pieces of an unfinished puzzle. The first came from an older woman who lived not far from the trail entrance and walked every evening for her health. She said she saw Megan from a distance, heading toward the little wooden bridge. She couldn't make out Megan's face in the dim light, but the bright top made her recognizable among the dark trunks. What stuck with her was that Megan looked back over her shoulder twice, not the sharp turn of hearing a loud noise, but quick glances, as if checking whether someone was behind her. She said Megan kept walking right after, didn't change direction or run, but the posture gave the woman an uneasy feeling, like the girl's instincts were on alert for something the woman herself couldn't see. The second statement came from a young couple, living on the row of houses east of the trail. They didn't see Megan directly, but they clearly remembered seeing a dark figure standing at the bend, the exact area already flagged as a priority point. The husband said they were walking their small dog when the dog kept pulling toward that spot, as if something had caught its attention. They glanced over and saw a person, or at least a human shape, standing close to the trees, completely still, as if watching the trail. They thought it was just someone smoking, or waiting for somebody, and didn't pay more attention. But when police pressed, the couple admitted the stance felt really strange, too rigid, too motionless, and it didn't react at all as they walked past. The wife said she caught a small glint like metal in the figure's hand, but wasn't sure what it was. Maybe a lighter, maybe something metallic, maybe just light reflecting off leaves. The third statement was from a 15-year-old boy who lived nearby. He hadn't been on the trail that night, but heard a short argument drifting from the path. He couldn't make out words, just urgency and tension in 2 voices, one of them sounding like a girl's. The noise lasted only a few seconds, and then stopped completely, as if the exchange had been cut off by something. When asked why he hadn't told anyone that night, the boy looked down and said he figured it was just neighborhood people arguing, and he didn't want to get involved. 3 statements, 3 viewpoints, 3 overlapping but not perfectly matching memories. A girl looking back twice, a motionless dark figure at the bend, a quick argument swallowed by the night. None were strong enough to stand as hard evidence, but as officers logged them, they noticed a faint pattern emerging. Megan had not been completely alone on the trail that night. Someone might have been following her. Someone might have been waiting at the bend, or she might have met someone she knew, and something happened so fast, no one had time to react. Remarkably, all three statements pointed to the exact same three areas police had already marked that morning. It felt as if invisible traces were slowly converging on the same axis, a meeting point of darkness and silence that only that night knew about. Still, everything remained just scattered dots, no physical evidence, no clear proof, no eyewitness to an actual crime. Just honest neighbors, each remembering a tiny piece of the truth, and all of them pointing back at Prairie Creek Trail, where Megan Hartley walked in and never walked out. While officers continued cross-referencing witness statements with the three key points on the map, a secondary search team moving north along the less traveled part of the trail stumbled onto the first truly unusual discovery of the morning. A scrap of dark blue fabric caught on a low thorny bush a few steps off the main path. The spot was tucked away, only visible if you bent down or if sunlight hit it at the right angle. A young volunteer noticed it first. He hesitated, then called an officer over, unsure whether it was just trash. But when the officer crouched and looked closer, what struck him wasn't only the color or size, it was the location. The scrap lay along an imaginary line, connecting two places witnesses had described, seeing something strange, where the young couple saw the motionless dark figure near the bend, and where the teenage boy heard the brief argument. The fabric was snagged as if someone hurrying past the bushes at night had brushed against the branches and torn a piece loose. In the midday light, the deep blue looked slightly faded, but the thick, slightly rough material stood out against the dry leaves. The officer carefully removed it with gloved hands, examined the weave, then sealed it in a clear plastic evidence bag following procedure. The team noted the exact position 6 meters off the trail, down in a dip between two large bushes, a place no ordinary walker would have reason to enter. When they brought the evidence into the light, they immediately compared it to the description of Megan's clothes provided by her family. Light-colored top, khaki pants, small white backpack. Nothing Megan wore matched the material or color. Preliminary conclusion: the fabric scrap did not belong to Megan. That was both relieving and alarming. Relieving because it wasn't a sign she had been injured. Alarming because it meant someone else had been there at the same time. Megan passed through. A few officers bent down to examine the surrounding bushes. Leaves were lightly disturbed, a couple of small twigs broken, but nothing strong enough to confirm a struggle or chase. What did catch their attention was that the ground where the fabric was found sat lower than the trail, as if someone had stepped off the main path and moved along the edge of the brush, possibly to avoid being seen. The seam map gained a new red marker. One of the veteran officers looked around, then said quietly to the group, "If someone was waiting along the route, or trying to dodge whoever was behind them, this is exactly where they'd stand." The comment didn't prove anything, but it lined up chillingly with the young couple's statement about the motionless dark figure in that very spot. While police continued mapping the location, a forensics technician arrived with his notebook to examine the fabric through the plastic. He had no on-site testing tools, but he noted that fabric this thick rarely comes off without significant force. It could be from a jacket, long pants, or something made of heavy cloth. The clearest detail was that it didn't belong to a high school girl heading home from the library. He wrote in the report, "High probability the fabric was torn by catching on branches while moving quickly." That matched the witness account of hurried running footsteps that night. It matched Megan looking back twice, as if someone were following. It matched the young couple's dog pulling toward the bushes. But right then, standing under the blazing Texas noon sun over the search area, the team still had no solid proof a crime had occurred. Still, one thing was clearer than ever: the dark blue scrap was the first piece of evidence that didn't belong to Megan, wasn't on the trail itself, and hadn't ended up there by accident. It was a tiny piece of the puzzle, yet far too specific to ignore, and though no one said it out loud, everyone gathered around that bush felt the same thing. If this scrap really came from someone else on the trail that night, then Megan had not been walking alone on Prairie Creek after all. The night after, While the search team was still gathering information from the area around Prairie Creek Trail, a light rain suddenly fell over Richardson. It wasn't heavy enough to cause flooding, but it was enough to soak the entire ground and wash away the faint traces the officers had hoped to find. The next morning, when the team returned to the scene, the landscape had changed significantly. The dry patches of soil from the day before had turned into thin layers of mud, leaves were pressed flat against the ground, and many of the spots the investigators had marked with tape were now hard to distinguish. The small signs, already vague, had become even fainter. A veteran officer with years of experience processing outdoor crime scenes stood in front of the section of trail near the small wooden bridge and shook his head. He explained that rain doesn't just erase footprints or bend branches, it also creates a layer of natural noise that distorts whatever impressions remain. The worst part, if someone had run, lurked, or dragged something through the night before, the rain had erased most of the natural evidence that could have shown direction of movement. When the team reached the brushy area where the green fabric thread was found, they saw the soil beneath their feet was now softer and no longer held its original structure well enough to determine whether there had been drag marks or small footprints belonging to Megan. All that remained was unevenly compressed, lumpy dirt. But those compressed patches could just as easily have been caused by the rain knocking dry leaves down and matting them together. While sweeping the right edge of the trail, a younger officer spotted a very faint tire track angled close to the muddy shoulder, as if a vehicle had briefly edged onto the side of the road before pulling away. The mark wasn't deep or clearly defined, just enough to recognize it as the trace of a small-sized tire. He immediately called his supervisor over, but when the captain crouched down, he studied the mark for only a few seconds before sighing. The rain had washed away the thin top layer of soil and smeared mud sideways, distorting the tread pattern. They couldn't determine tire size, couldn't measure track width, couldn't even be completely certain the faint mark was from the previous night or an older one from days earlier. It no longer had legal value for the file, even though the young officer still believed it could be something important. By procedure, evidence had to be clear enough to be sealed. In the end, the tire track was noted in the report as a side comment, not treated as evidence. That was what quietly frustrated many of the officers. They knew the mark might be connected, but they couldn't use it. As the team expanded the search into areas with more downed trees, they encountered another problem. The local geology was highly disturbed. Prairie Creek Trail was built on sandy loam mixed with gravel, so the surface changed easily after rain. Just a few hours of light rain were enough to render basic trace analysis methods almost useless. Spots that yesterday might have held footprints, slide marks, or impressions from something heavy were now just streaked with runoff. Even the area near the creek had been lightly eroded, turning the ground into small gullies that obscured any natural signs that might have hinted at someone's direction of movement in the dark. Another officer tried looking for small footprints, ones that could match Megan's shoe size, but every circular depression he found lacked sharp edges. Some were just low spots where water had pooled, others could have belonged to a jogger from that same morning. It was impossible to tell. The washed-away soil made every guess too fragile to stand as evidence. When the morning search ended, the mood among the officers was heavy. They knew they had lost their most precious window, the brief period right after Megan vanished when traces were still fresh and still carried signals of human movement. But the weather had blurred everything, as if Prairie Creek Trail itself had erased the very truth they were trying to find. In that day's scene log, the final summary read, "Unable to determine direction of departure from the trail, no clear signs of criminal activity, tire track does not qualify as evidence." And though the wording was dry, no one on the team could deny that the overnight rain had doubled or tripled the difficulty of the job. Megan had vanished into the darkness, and now even the traces of that darkness had been wiped away. After the rain erased many natural traces and made the scene far harder to read, Richardson PD realized they had to shift focus to the human element, people who had seen Megan, spoken to her, or simply crossed paths with her at the same time. Since the trail no longer held much physical evidence, the investigators launched a contact screening strategy, examining everyone who might have interacted with Megan in the 24 hours before she disappeared. The first list was people she had seen at the library that evening: study group classmates, the evening librarian, and a few patrons returning books. When questioned, the students in her group said Megan left the library earlier than usual, but didn't seem rushed or upset. One friend recalled that Megan received a note someone passed to her, but since she only glimpsed it, she wasn't sure if it was a study note or a personal message. When police pressed, the friend hesitated and said Megan had been a little quieter than normal. Not much, just like someone lost in thought. It was vague, but it didn't feel forced, so the police noted it. The evening librarian said Megan was a regular after-hours visitor, and nothing seemed unusual that night. However, the librarian did offer one noteworthy detail. Sometimes a middle-aged man showed up around the same time as Megan, rarely checked out books, and usually just sat at the reading tables near the windows. The librarian didn't know his name but remembered he had come several times in recent weeks. When asked, the librarian couldn't say for sure whether the man ever watched Megan, but the coincidence was enough for police to log it. Next came people who had been walking Prairie Creek Trail that evening. One middle-aged man said he saw a girl walking quickly across the wooden bridge, but couldn't be sure it was Megan because of the dim light. He also remembered someone walking not far behind her, but tree shadows hid most of the figure. He couldn't tell male or female. Another woman reported a car driving slowly along the road near the trail, something she thought was unusual because that road rarely had traffic at night. Police had to note, however, that her statement came after Megan's disappearance was public, meaning memory could be influenced. A pattern emerged in the statements: many people saw something odd, but no two people saw the same thing. For the police, this was the most frustrating situation: plenty of information, but no clear overlap. When investigators expanded to the small commercial strip 2 blocks from the library, where Megan sometimes stopped for snacks, they interviewed convenience store and pharmacy staff. One clerk at the convenience store said Megan had come in a few days before she vanished, and seemed distracted, repeatedly glancing out the glass door as if checking for someone. It was just a vague impression, but when pressed, the clerk insisted, "I think the kid was scared of something, or trying to avoid someone." That statement conflicted with the library classmates, who said Megan was only slightly quiet, not tense at all. Then, amid the tangle of statements, one piece of information made detectives pause longer than usual. An upper-class student named Caleb said that 2 or 3 weeks earlier, Megan had told him she felt like someone was following her when she walked the trail home. Caleb said Megan wasn't sure it was real, but she had turned around a couple of times after hearing footsteps behind her. She never named anyone or described a face, but Caleb remembered her saying, almost to herself, "I think someone's waiting for me somewhere, but I don't know." That statement suddenly made other witnesses' memories more ominous. The older woman who saw Megan look back twice, the dark figure standing at the bend, the brief argument the teenage boy heard, the green fabric caught in the brush. Taken separately, each detail could be explained innocently, but placed next to "someone's following me," they created the chilling sense that Megan had sensed something beforehand, something she never managed to tell anyone clearly. Still, police remained cautious. Caleb's statement was treated as secondary, because no other evidence supported it. Plenty of 16-year-olds imagine or exaggerate fear when walking alone at night. At the same time, they couldn't ignore how well it lined up with the vague signs others reported on the trail. By the end of that workday, Megan's missing person file had grown thicker by several pages, yet everything remained as tangled as a painting with no central image. Police had plenty of statements, but they were all thin lines that never crossed or pointed directly at anyone, and the overall feeling hadn't changed. Something had happened on Prairie Creek Trail that night. Something unclear, quiet, and carrying a scent of danger the police still couldn't name. As the jumbled statements about vague movements around Prairie Creek Trail still failed to produce a clear investigative direction, Richardson PD began receiving a flood of tips from outside. As often happens in missing person cases, rumors, misunderstandings, and deliberate false reports started pouring in, each one like a crooked branch, forcing the team to keep sifting so they wouldn't be pulled off the main path. In just 2 days, 3 prominent leads surfaced, only to be quickly ruled meaningless or false, making the overall picture even messier. The first came from a man in Dallas, about a 20-minute drive from Richardson. He called police certain he had seen Megan at a burger restaurant the evening after she disappeared. He said he remembered that face well, because he had seen Megan with friends around Richardson before, and was sure he couldn't be mistaken. But when police checked the restaurant's cameras and questioned staff, everyone confirmed no girl matching the description had been there at the time he claimed. When pressed further, the man grew hesitant and admitted he might have mixed her up with someone who looked like her. It was the classic kind of lead police often get, well-meaning citizens whose memories are colored by worry or news coverage. Still, it cost time and manpower to rule out. The second lead was an anonymous phone call to the police tip line. A young male voice, sounding like he was deliberately whispering, said Megan had run away and that everyone should stop looking. When the operator asked for details, the caller grew flustered and hung up. Police traced the number to a public payphone in Plano with no cameras nearby at the time of the call. It was obviously a cruel prank, but it added another layer of noise. One of the younger officers wrote in frustration, "If the goal was to distract us, the caller succeeded for the first few minutes." The third lead came from a 14-year-old who claimed he saw Megan near the small lake right after she supposedly left the library. But when police checked timelines against library cameras and other witnesses, they realized the boy had mixed up the days. He had seen Megan the previous afternoon, not the night she vanished. When questioned again, the boy blushed and admitted he wasn't sure about the time, but thought speaking up might help. These kinds of leads, though harmless, diluted the investigation's focus. The team had to spend time proving they were not evidence while every passing hour was precious. A clear stall was forming. The temporary file showed no progress, no new physical evidence, no witness who saw a crime, no one who saw Megan leave the trail, and all the unusual things existed only as shadows in people's memories. The more they dug, the more unnatural the scene's silence felt, as if Megan hadn't just disappeared. Everything around her had been distorted too, leaving a void that couldn't be filled. One veteran investigator quietly told a colleague as they packed up after another long day, "If someone bad was out there that night, he really knew how to leave no trace. Or he got incredibly lucky." The younger officer beside him just gave a heavy look in response, because by that point, even after chasing every lead, from Dallas, from Plano, from scattered witness statements, they all ended in short dead ends. And while they were busy eliminating each false lead, the biggest truth remained unchanged. Megan Hartley was still missing, and nothing proved she had simply gotten lost or left on her own. The case officially entered a state of impasse, a cold, silent, dangerous impasse for any investigation. 4 years had passed since the night Megan Hartley vanished into the darkness on Prairie Creek Trail, and the once intense investigation full of hope and worry had been worn down to scattered fragments. In 1985, Richardson PD officially acknowledged what everyone had quietly understood for months: they no longer had any truly viable investigative direction. Megan's case, which began as an urgent search, slowly stretched into days without leads, then became a thick file of empty reports. No DNA, no surveillance cameras, no witness who clearly saw a crime. The limitations of that era left police essentially blind throughout the process. Despite re-examining every statement, every location, every person present near the trail that night, every effort hit an invisible wall of silence. The technological advances that later became the foundation of modern forensics simply didn't exist. Then no DNA analysis, no electronic fingerprint databases, no tools to recover images or audio from the night of the disappearance. The investigation relied solely on witness memory and physical traces, most of which had been washed away by that night's rain. When the team finally narrowed down everything still of value from the scene, the evidence list contained exactly 3 items: the notebook dropped beside the path, the green fabric thread caught in the brush, and the faint tire track in the dirt. Each item was placed in a separate sealed bag, numbered, time-stamped, and recorded as the only 3 pieces left of a story that had been cut short. Megan's notebook, the first item, was the only thing definitively hers, but it carried no information or signs of disturbance. It just lay there, coldly, like a piece of ordinary life forgotten by someone, or by Megan herself, in a moment that couldn't be explained. The green fabric thread, the second item, was the only clue suggesting a second person might have been on the trail, but they couldn't identify the material, origin, or link it to any specific suspect. No DNA, no fiber analysis technology, no database for comparison. It was simply a thread caught where it shouldn't be. The faint tire track, the third item, was even weaker. Distorted by rain, they couldn't measure track width or tread pattern to identify the vehicle type. It was recorded in the file with a short description, indistinct tire mark, not usable as evidence. Then, in mid-1985, after hundreds of investigative hours, dozens of expanded searches, and countless statements ruled out, Megan Hartley's file was moved to a metal cabinet in the Collin County Evidence Archives, the place where stalled cases are stored until technology or luck brings something new. Stamped in red on the folder, "Cold Case." No press conference, no official announcement, just the silence of a system that could go no further, of a case that could take no more steps. An older officer on the original team, after placing the last evidence bag in the drawer, quietly said to the colleague beside him, "Some cases slip into the dark faster than we can chase them." And that's exactly what happened. Megan Hartley's file slid into the darkness. Not the darkness of the night she vanished, but the darkness of forgotten cases, where every answer is locked away with 3 fragile pieces of evidence, waiting for the day someone opens the drawer again and wonders what really happened on Prairie Creek Trail in 1981. In 2019, 34 years after Megan Hartley's name was stamped "Cold Case" and filed in a metal drawer in Collin County, the folder was opened for the first time, not because of a new witness, a late confession, or a sudden breakthrough, just because one detective happened to pick it from a list of old cases slated for review. Detective Maria Vasquez, recently transferred from analysis to Richardson PD's cold case unit, was tasked with re-examining old files to assess whether modern technology could breathe new life into them. When Maria sat down at the old wooden table in the archives and pulled the drawer containing Megan's file, the metal scraped softly, as if the cabinet itself had been asleep too long. She placed the faded brown folder in front of her. The corners were worn, and Hartley Megan, missing person 1981, was handwritten in the hard, slightly slanted script typical of that era. Opening the first pages, Maria immediately felt the difference of a case investigated almost 4 decades earlier. Yellowed paper, faded ballpoint ink, and extremely brief scene descriptions. No digital photos, no modern forensic checklists. She read every line, every note, every overlooked detail, and the deeper she went, the more an uneasy feeling grew in her chest. So much had been missed. The faint tire track dismissed because it wasn't clear enough. The green fabric described in one simple sentence, dark green cloth, material undetermined. No fiber classification, no advanced lab submission. The spot where Megan's notebook was found documented only in words, no photos, no detailed scene diagram, and most strikingly, not a single line in the 1981 reports showed anyone had seriously considered that Megan might have been approached, followed, or pulled off the trail in another direction. Everything was viewed through the lens of the time. A teenage girl walking alone, goes missing, no clear crime, could be abduction, could be disorientation, could be drowning. In many missing person cases from the 1970s and 80s, that mindset let countless investigations fall asleep. Maria leaned back for a moment, breathed slowly, then refocused. She didn't blame the original officers, they didn't have the tools she had now, but she knew everything needed for a potential breakthrough was right inside this old file. She opened the evidence bags containing the 3 surviving items, the notebook, the green fabric thread, and the report about the tire track. The notebook had already been confirmed as Megan's, but held no further value. The tire track was long gone. Only the green fabric thread remained, the only physical item that didn't belong to Megan, and had been found in the most suspicious location. Maria held the clear plastic bag up to the light. The thread still held its deep green color, though time had slightly frayed the edges. The material was thick, a little coarse, like work clothing or an old jacket. This same thread had raised the most questions for the 1981 team, but back then they could do nothing more than log it as an item of unknown origin. Maria stared at it for a long time. To her, it wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was the only remaining physical clue from 1981, the one thing that could cross the boundary the old investigation couldn't reach. And in a case with no direct witnesses, no cameras, no DNA from the start, any trace from someone other than Megan had the potential to be the key to identifying who was near her in her final moments. Maria decided on the spot, the thread had to be retested with modern technology. She contacted the Tarrant County Forensic Lab, equipped for touch DNA analysis, the technique that can extract DNA from the tiniest skin cells left on material, even decades later. When the lab tech asked why she wanted touch DNA on a 38-year-old case, Maria simply said, "Because this is all we have left." That decision wasn't an instant turning point, but it was the first time in nearly 4 decades that Megan Hartley's file was opened with real hope, not based on memory, not on guesswork, but on the simplest yet most powerful thing in any investigation: evidence that can speak, if someone knows how to listen. As Maria signed the paperwork to transfer the evidence to the lab, she didn't know where it would lead, but she knew one thing hadn't changed. Megan's disappearance could not have been for no reason, and if the truth had once been hidden in the dark, sometimes all it takes is one small thread forgotten for 38 years to pull the whole curtain down. When the green fabric thread was transferred to the Tarrant County Forensic Lab, analysis began that same week. The evidence item was opened on a stainless steel table under a focused white light, and gloved forensic technicians carefully used tweezers to lift each fiber, avoiding damage to any remaining cells. Touch DNA is far from perfect. Even under ideal conditions, the amount of DNA recovered from fabric decades old is usually extremely small, easily contaminated, or degraded, to the point where only broken fragments remain that are insufficient for a full profile. Still, the lab team did everything possible, following every step of modern protocol: soaking solution, amplification, separation, then running the samples through a high-performance DNA analyzer. When the first results came back, the forensic technician immediately contacted Detective Maria Vasquez. The DNA profile from the thread was, as expected, incomplete. Some loci were missing, others noisy, but the critical parts, the segments stable enough, were sufficient to be uploaded to CODIS as a partial profile. An incomplete DNA profile can still find close genetic relatives, enough to identify someone related by blood to the original source. That is exactly what makes touch DNA a powerful weapon in cold cases. Maria stood behind the technician as he entered the profile and hit submit. Both knew the result could be nothing. Most old DNA profiles never match anything, but in rare cases, it is precisely these incomplete profiles that unlock leads missed for decades. When CODIS returned the result, the screen flashed a line Maria had waited years in her career to see: partial match found, probability, pointing to family relationship. Below it was the name with the closest compatibility score, Price. Not a full name, not a criminal record, just a familial match, meaning the DNA on the thread was highly likely related to the Price family line, a fairly common surname in Texas, but not so common as to be meaningless. For the first time since 1981, the Megan Hartley case had a sign pointing to a specific person being near the spot where she vanished. Maria requested expanded details on the match. The results showed the closest DNA profile in the system belonged to a man under 40 named Price, who had his DNA collected years earlier for a minor, non-violent offense. But the key wasn't that man, it was the fact that the source DNA on the thread was most likely his father, uncle, or a close blood relative. Touch DNA sometimes can't give a complete answer, but it can draw a genetic trail to follow. Maria immediately cross-checked Richardson resident records from the early 1980s against the list of Price families who had lived near Prairie Creek Trail. The information surfaced faster than she expected. In 1981, only 2 Price households lived within a half-mile radius of where Megan disappeared. One family moved away in 1984, the other left in 1982. Both were long gone from Richardson. A chill ran down Maria's spine, not because she believed she had just found the perpetrator, but because for the first time in nearly 40 years, something matched between the scene and a real person. She realized that if the son's DNA didn't match perfectly, but was close, the person who left the DNA on the thread could belong to the previous generation. And if that person had lived in Richardson in 1981, this was no longer coincidence. Maria printed the records of every adult male Price who had lived near Prairie Creek Trail at that time. One name stood out: James Price. Not because he had a serious criminal record, only minor infractions, but because he had worked within a few blocks of Prairie Creek Trail at the exact time Megan disappeared. Maria studied James's old address, a house just minutes on foot from the trail. She read on: James Price left Richardson in 1982 for unknown reasons. Records showed he moved to Garland, then to an undetermined location. No new information after 2002, except a cold note in the resident database. No recent activity. That line made Maria pause. If James Price was still alive, he would be over 60. If he was deceased, his file might still contain vital details about surviving relatives, including the son who had produced the near-CODIS match. But most importantly, he had lived right in the area where Megan vanished, and now evidence linked the Price family to the scene. This was not random coincidence. This was the first piece in 38 years that could connect a specific human being to the 3 silent items of evidence from that night. When Maria closed the file and looked at the evidence bag holding the green thread, she knew she had crossed the stalemate threshold of nearly 4 decades. The night Megan disappeared was no longer endless darkness. It now had a thin, faint, but real thread of light, leading her to a place the 1981 investigation could never reach. And for the first time since the case was reopened, Maria whispered a sentence no one had dared say aloud in years: "We have a trail to follow." When the name Price appeared in the CODIS results with a close probability match, Detective Maria Vasquez began the next phase, determining which member of that family line could be linked to the DNA on the green fabric thread. The system showed the closest DNA profile belonged to Evan Price, 33, residing in Denton, Texas. Evan's DNA was in CODIS because of a minor violation years earlier, nothing violent, but enough to be retained. That did not make Evan a suspect, but it did make him the starting point for identifying who left the DNA on the thread. Maria and another officer went to the computer repair shop where Evan worked. When asked about the 1981 Megan Hartley case, Evan's eyes widened, then he let out an incredulous laugh. He was born in 1986, the year Megan's file officially became a cold case. "I wasn't even alive when that happened," Evan said, sounding both confused and annoyed. "I don't know who Megan is. I've never heard the name." Maria watched his reaction closely. No signs of deception, no unusual tension, and most importantly, Evan's DNA was not the DNA found on the thread, only a partial match, meaning the person who left it was related by blood, but not him, a father, uncle, or close relative. Maria asked, "Do you have any relatives who lived in Richardson in 1981? Evan paused. The question seemed to stir something uncomfortable. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through old messages from a relative for an address, and answered slowly, "My dad lived in Richardson before I was born." The name James Price. When Maria heard it, the same chill from the lab returned. This was the exact name she had seen on the 1981 Richardson resident list. And now that man had not only lived next to Prairie Creek Trail, he had a son whose DNA closely matched the sample from the thread. Maria pressed Evan gently about his father. Evan answered cautiously, clearly not enjoying the topic, "My dad was a mechanic. He worked at a garage near Richardson back then. I don't know much. He left when I was a few years old. We don't talk." When asked where James was now, Evan just shook his head. "I don't know. He disappeared from my life a long time ago. I grew up with my mom. I haven't seen him since I was 10. Evan didn't hide the bitterness in his voice. But the fact that James Price had disappeared from his son's life at an unclear point only heightened Maria's interest. She left the shop with a new file opened, James Price, born 1951, occupation mechanic. Former residence Richardson, Texas. Address approximately 0.4 miles from Prairie Creek Trail. Moved away 1982. No recorded activity after 2002. Back at the station, she requested full extracts of James's records from resident archives, employment files, tax records, and vehicle data. Page after page was printed and spread across the table like a silent map, saying nothing clearly, yet holding potential leads. Records showed James had worked as a mechanic at a small auto shop in South Richardson. He had one arrest in 1977 for disorderly conduct. Nothing serious. The most notable detail in 1981, the exact year Megan vanished. James lived alone in a small rented house, less than a 10-minute walk from where she disappeared. And then, in 1982, he abruptly moved to Garland, with no clear reason. Sudden move by itself is not evidence of crime. But in a 38-year dry case, every detail must be examined under a magnifying glass. Maria noted in her notebook, Evan, only 33, cannot be directly involved. DNA from thread close match source is first or second degree blood relative. James Price lived near the trail the year Megan vanished. James moved away just 1 year after the disappearance. No record activity since 2002. She looked at the old driver's license photo of James, a man with a wide forehead, square jaw, slightly cold eyes. Nothing in the picture screamed suspicion, but nothing made him look entirely ordinary either. For Maria, the most important thing wasn't James's appearance in 1981. It was that he was the only person who could explain why Price family DNA appeared on a thread found exactly where Megan might have encountered someone in the dark. A 38-year-old cold case finally had a name in the suspect circle, not from direct evidence, but from a thin yet undeniable genetic trace. Maria closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them and looked at James Price's photo again. "We start with him," she said quietly. This was no longer a forgotten file. The Price family, a name that once meant nothing, was now the center. And from that green thread, from the closest DNA match, the Megan Hartley case had taken its strongest step forward since 1981. As the file on James Price revealed more suspicious details, Detective Maria Vasquez decided to return to Evan Price one more time, this time not just for information, but to observe him as someone standing between two generations, an innocent son and a mysterious father who had vanished from the system nearly 2 decades earlier. When Maria appeared at the computer repair shop where Evan worked, his demeanor was completely different from the first visit. No longer surprised, just visibly wary. That told Maria that Evan knew more than he had let on, or at least understood that his father was not a normal man. When Maria calmly mentioned James, no threat in her tone, Evan immediately looked down and pretended to organize parts on the counter. "I already told you," he answered dryly. "I don't know what he did in Richardson, and I don't care." Maria didn't push, just asked softly, "When was the last time you saw him?" Evan sighed and repeated the same answer. "When I was 10, he disappeared. No contact, no letters, nothing." But this time, as he spoke, Evan avoided her eyes, not because he was lying, but as if hiding real emotion. The kind of reaction seasoned investigators often describe as underlying fear. After that meeting, Maria was certain Evan had no involvement in 1981. He wasn't born yet, but he was holding some invisible link to his father. So the team took the next step, confirm Evan's DNA against the touch DNA from the green thread using legally permitted indirect collection, abandoned items. 2 officers surveilled Evan for a week, sitting in unmarked cars in the shop parking lot and outside the apartment he shared with his girlfriend. No direct contact, just waiting for a lawful DNA sample. The opportunity came on a Thursday afternoon. Evan tossed a paper coffee cup into a public trash can beside the shop. The officers, wearing gloves, retrieved it immediately, sealed it, and sent it to the Tarrant County lab. When the results came back, Maria stood watching the technician read the numbers, comparing Evan's full profile to the 1981 partial profile from the green thread. The technician's first words made Maria stop breathing. match 50%, consistent with parent-child relationship. There was no doubt left. The DNA on the fabric thread belonged to Evan's father, James Price himself. Evan was immediately cleared as a direct suspect, but at the same time he was pulled into the center of the investigation in a different way. He was the only living person with a blood tie to the potential perpetrator. This turned the case from a simple cold case into a full forensic confirmation phase. The green thread found where Megan disappeared now carried James Price's DNA. Maria leaned back against the lab wall, feeling both relief at finally having a solid investigative direction and a heavy weight at the realization that James, the man who lived alone near the trail in 1981, might have been directly involved in Megan's disappearance. But a bigger question suddenly rose. If James was the one there, if his DNA was on the thread, why had Evan reacted so strangely? Maria decided to meet Evan a third time, now at the police station. He was not summoned as a suspect, he was only asked to provide additional information, but when Evan walked into the small interview room, his body language was tenser than before. He kept twisting a silver ring on his finger, eyes fixed on the floor. Maria opened her laptop, turned the screen toward Evan, and showed him the DNA analysis results. Evan froze. He swallowed hard, pushed his chair back slightly, then whispered, "I knew he wasn't a good guy." But, DNA. In Richardson, Maria asked directly, no beating around the bush, "Do you know what your father did? Has anyone in the family ever said he was involved with someone else? A case, a woman, a girl?" Evan was silent for a very long time, so long that Maria could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Finally he spoke, his voice tired, as if he had carried something heavy for years. "My mom never talked about him. I only remember one time when I was little. She told me to stay away from dark places outside the house. I asked why. She said my dad had once done something bad, but she never said what." Maria pressed, "That's all." Evan nodded, but his eyes revealed he knew more than his words let on. He twisted the ring again, an unconscious stress response. Maria didn't push further, but it was clear Evan knew his father was dangerous in some way, even if he didn't know the details. The team met that same night, and for the first time, they had a clear working theory. James Price was the person who left DNA at the spot where Megan vanished. No longer speculation, no longer vague coincidence, but a direct genetic link. Maria also stressed, "We don't know what role Evan plays yet. He might know nothing, or he might know his father was involved in something, and is hiding it out of fear." But no one believed Evan was directly involved. He was just a child when James disappeared in 2002. Still, the investigation could not ignore Evan. He was the only living Price family member police could reach, and from now on, he was not just a source of information, he was the only remaining open door to understanding what really happened the night Megan Hartley vanished, on Prairie Creek Trail in 1981. James Price might be the perpetrator, but Evan, whether he realized it or not, might be holding the last fragments of memory that could lead to a truth buried for nearly 40 years. The trail had finally warmed, and now, so had the Price family. After the final meeting with Evan Price, Detective Maria Vasquez left the interview room feeling heavier than when she entered. The few, scattered things Evan had revealed were like small pebbles dropped into still water, creating ripples that pushed the investigation in an entirely new direction. While talking about his childhood, Evan let slip one sentence that made Maria stop cold. "I just remember before he left, he said he had to hide something before leaving Texas. I overheard him telling a stranger. I was too young to understand." That sentence, only a few seconds long, was enough for Maria to stop writing and look straight at Evan. "Do you know where?" Evan shook his head, but after a few minutes of silence, he remembered one more detail. James used to take him fishing when he was little, and one of the places they often went was Lavon Lake, a large lake about 30 minutes' drive from Richardson. According to Evan, the last time he saw his father, James had said vaguely that he would go back to that lake to finish some unfinished business. At the time Evan thought his dad was talking about debts or personal matters, but now those words carried a completely different tone. The very next morning, Maria drew up a search plan for Lavon Lake. This was not a random search. Police knew one thing: a perpetrator who wants to hide something will always choose the place he knows best, and James Price had taken his son to Lavon Lake many times. By noon that day, the Collin County search team and a special technical unit were deployed to the eastern shore of the lake, an area rarely visited, with many low-lying sections. The lake wind blew hard, the water rippled under the sun, in stark contrast to the grave atmosphere surrounding the investigators. Among the equipment they brought, the most important was GPR, ground-penetrating radar, designed to detect anomalies beneath the soil or sediment. Technicians pulled the GPR along the shoreline in parallel lines between hard ground and wet mud. Each pass produced waves on the screen, mostly signals from rocks, roots or naturally compacted soil. But then, after about 40 minutes, one technician froze in front of the monitor. An unusual shape had appeared, not rock, not roots, but a distinct rectangular anomaly, with clear edges, buried just over half a meter deep. Officers immediately marked the spot, placed stakes around the area, and called in the hand-digging team to avoid damaging anything below. Maria stood nearby, watching every move, her face expressionless, but her eyes unblinking. As the first layer of soil was removed, then the second, no one spoke. The tension was so thick you could hear a pin drop. When the third layer was pushed aside, the smell of wet earth grew stronger. The digger switched to a small shovel, lowering each stroke carefully. Then suddenly the blade hit something. Clank. That sound made everyone stop. The digger knelt, gently brushed away the surrounding soil with his hands. A curved piece of bone appeared beneath the dark earth. Not animal bone. The shape was unmistakable, human. One of the officers immediately called forensics. Maria knelt beside the pit, eyes locked on the newly exposed soil. As the digger continued clearing, another object emerged. A small scrap of fabric, faded ivory white, covered in dirt but still showing stitching along the edge. When the technician lifted the fabric scrap in a plastic bag, Maria's expression changed instantly. She had studied photos of Megan's clothing from the old file hundreds of times, and she knew exactly what this scrap was. Part of the shirt Megan had been wearing that night. In that moment, no one on the team said a word. No one needed to. Human bone accompanied by a piece of Megan's shirt, found exactly where Evan said his father had once hidden something. This was no longer theory or guesswork. This was the first physical evidence proving Megan Hartley had not walked away from Prairie Creek Trail on that fateful night in 1981, and that James Price had truly been involved. As the forensic team expanded the excavation area, more bone fragments gradually appeared, mixed in the mud. This indicated the body had decomposed naturally over time, not buried deeply with professional tools, but hastily, just enough to hide it from view. What chilled Maria most was nature's silence for 38 years. Every trace, every cry, every truth, lying quietly beneath the soil, right under the feet of people walking, fishing, and enjoying weekends for decades. When the green thread was collected at Prairie Creek Trail, it was only a fragile clue, but now, at Lavon Lake, the truth had begun to surface, and Maria knew the investigation had entered a phase from which there was no turning back. What they had just found was not just evidence, it was Megan Hartley's final voice, from the deepest darkness of nearly 40 years. Only one question remained unanswered. What exactly had James Price done, and who might have known about it? When the first bone fragments were brought to the Collin County Forensic Lab, the entire investigative atmosphere shifted to urgent but silent. No one doubted they had found Megan Hartley's remains, but in criminal investigations, feelings and intuition are never enough. Everything had to be proven by science, layer by layer, data point by data point, to confirm that what lay beneath the soil at Lavon Lake truly belonged to the girl who vanished in 1981. The evidence bags containing soil, bone, and fabric were transferred to the lab within hours. There, the forensic process began at the most basic level: soil analysis. Technicians took soil samples from 3 different depths and compared mineral composition, pH, and particle structure with samples from the surrounding area. Preliminary results showed an astonishing match. The soil clinging to the bones and shirt fragment had the same structure as the subsurface soil at Lavon Lake, a characteristic extremely unlikely to occur by chance. Moreover, soil trapped in bone crevices showed signs of long-term accumulation, proving the remains had been there for decades. No mechanical disturbance from outside, no evidence the body had ever been dug up and reburied. Everything confirmed, Megan or whoever was buried there had lain beneath that soil since 1981. While soil analysis continued, the lab immediately began DNA testing on the bones, particularly the femur and pelvis, the two areas that best preserve DNA after long burial. They used mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, the type passed down the maternal line and capable of surviving harsh conditions. Comparing the mtDNA to a sample provided by Megan's cousin, the result displayed the words everyone had been waiting for yet still left the lab in absolute silence: maternal match, probability 99.9%. There was no longer any doubt. The bones belonged to Megan Hartley, the 16-year-old girl who disappeared from Prairie Creek Trail nearly 4 decades earlier. When Maria received the results, she sat still for several seconds, not from surprise, she had sensed this for a long time, but from the weight of the truth. After 38 years, that young girl had finally been found, but along with confirmation came a more painful question: what exactly had happened on that trail, and why had the body been taken all the way to Lavon Lake? While awaiting further reports, the forensic team moved to the fabric fragment found with the bones. The cloth was examined under a high-powered microscope to observe weave structure, thread, and mechanical damage. When the image was enlarged, they discovered many threads torn in irregular twisting patterns, evidence of forceful ripping, not natural decomposition. Analysis of the tear lines showed horizontal pulling force, consistent with the fabric being dragged or yanked hard. This immediately reminded Maria of vague 1981 witness statements: the couple near the trail, who heard running suddenly stop, the teenager who heard a short argument. But most importantly, the elderly witness who reported hearing a soft scraping sound, like someone being dragged into the brush. The forensic results now fully confirmed it. The shirt was torn in a way that showed Megan had been pulled or yanked at the time of the incident. The frayed edges also indicated contact with rough surfaces, possibly rocks, roots, or the uneven ground of Prairie Creek Trail. This proved any struggle, if there was one, occurred on the trail itself, not at the burial site. Another detail that chilled the entire forensic team was the soil embedded in the fabric's weave. Soil analysis of the dirt on the shirt showed a match with Prairie Creek Trail soil, not Lavon Lake, where the body was buried. This meant Megan was attacked, or dragged right on the trail, then the body was transported to Lavon Lake for concealment. This was a major breakthrough. It essentially reconstructed the perpetrator's final route. First the place Megan was overpowered, then where the body was taken, then where the perpetrator buried it. Everything had started with one green thread, and now everything was gradually being revealed through modern forensics. DNA recovered from the bone surfaces also revealed one more trace, a tiny amount of foreign DNA that did not match Megan, located on the bone exterior, possibly from direct contact with the perpetrator while moving the body. Though the sample was extremely small and heavily degraded, it indicated another person's presence, consistent with the conclusion that a man had handled Megan's body while she was unconscious or dead. When the forensic technician finished the report, Maria knew the picture was no longer blurred. Soil analysis matched. Bone DNA confirmed Megan's identity. The torn shirt corroborated statements, dismissed in 1981, and everything pointed in the same direction. Megan was attacked at Prairie Creek Trail, dragged into the dark, then taken to Lavon Lake by a man who once lived near the trail, James Price. But what troubled Maria most was a new question: did James act alone, or was someone else involved? Night fell over the office, but for Maria, for the first time in 38 years, the Megan Hartley case was no longer an endless shadow. It was speaking now, through science, through what was left behind, through the earth itself. Once the forensic results from Lavon Lake were confirmed, Detective Maria Vasquez knew the investigation had entered a phase where no piece could be overlooked. And among the old clues once dismissed, there was one small detail that had puzzled the 1981 team: an anonymous 911 call made the night Megan disappeared, then treated as a prank or mistaken report. In 1981, audio recording technology was primitive. The tape was low-quality magnetic, full of noise, and the call cut off mid-sentence. The dispatcher at the time described it as just a few seconds, male voice, vaguely panicked, but with no specific information. It was never considered evidence. Now with digital advancement, that recording became a potentially valuable piece. Maria contacted the Texas DPS Audio Forensics Unit and requested full recovery of the 911 tape from that night. Finding a nearly 40-year-old tape was not easy. It was stored in the old dispatch archives, slightly moldy, with weakened magnetic coating in places. But the team believed they could recover at least 60% of the audio, using modern noise filtering technology. It took 2 weeks before they produced a listenable digital file. When Maria put on the headphones, the glow from the screen seemed to narrow, leaving only the green waveform pulsing across it. First came the hiss of old tape, then a stretched-out ambient sound, typical of recordings from that era. A second later, a male voice appeared, faint, choked, breathing heavily, as if holding the phone with a shaking hand. "Hello?" Then a burst of static. Next came broken but clearer than expected words. She wasn't supposed to." Then the tape cut off. Maria closed her eyes for a few seconds. Every hair on the back of her neck stood up. That sentence, though incomplete, could not be dismissed as meaningless. It carried the tone of an unintended incident, a reaction from someone who had just done something that spiraled out of control. When the audio file was sent to the voiceprint analysis team, they began comparing the voice to database samples of individuals who had records in Texas at the time. No one expected a strong result. Voiceprint is not as conclusive as DNA, but it could provide direction. While waiting, Maria continued cross-referencing data. James Price, age 30 in 1981, lived alone, had a history of hot-tempered behavior, owned an old pickup, was frequently near Prairie Creek Trail, and his DNA was directly linked to the green thread. If the perpetrator was James, could he have panicked afterward and called 911? It was entirely possible. Some offenders, especially those without prior violent records, sometimes call 911 in a state of panic or guilt. If James was the man on the call, "She wasn't supposed to" could mean "she wasn't supposed to see me," or "this wasn't supposed to happen." A classic slip often seen in unplanned crimes. When the official voiceprint report arrived, Maria read the first line and felt ice crawl down her spine. Voice match probability, 80%, consistent with James Price. Not 100%, because the recording was too old and noisy. But 80%, for a 1981 tape, was an extraordinarily strong result. It could not be used to convict, but it was enough to state one thing: that 911 call was very likely made by James Price. Maria replayed the clip several times. Each time, the end of the man's sentence sounded like footsteps or rapid breathing. An audio technician later added one more detail: faint wind noise, strongly suggesting the call was made outdoors, not inside a building. This matched eerily with the possibility that James called right after the attack, or while deciding what to do next. When Maria read the in-depth analysis report, one line made her pause longer. Final syllable "see-me" distorted but high phonetic compatibility. By reconstructing the clipped waveform and comparing it to dozens of similar pronunciations, the team determined the original complete sentence was most likely, "She wasn't supposed to see me." That sentence cut through the investigation room like a cold blade. If this truly was James's voice, it revealed an entirely new truth. Megan had seen something she was never meant to see, something that forced James to intervene, drag her into the darkness, and caused everything to spiral out of control. Not a random attack, not any stranger, not someone wandering in the night, but a man with something to hide, something Megan accidentally witnessed on that dark trail. Maria read the sentence dozens of times. She knew forensics had already proven Megan was attacked at Prairie Creek Trail, the body buried at Lavon Lake. James's DNA on the green thread, and now voiceprint showed the man on the 911 call was almost certainly James, panicked having just made a terrible mistake, trying to say something no one understood. What silenced Maria for a long time was the deeper meaning of those words. What had James been doing before Megan saw him? And when Megan saw him, it was enough to seal her fate. For the first time, after nearly 4 decades, the darkness surrounding Megan's final moments was beginning to take shape, not as a shadow, but as a man. James Price, a man she was never supposed to see. When the voiceprint showed an 80% match with James Price, and forensics confirmed that the thread, soil, bones, and shirt fragment all pointed in one single direction, Detective Maria Vasquez had to face a crucial reality. James Price was dead, missing from the system since 2002, no longer prosecutable or confrontable. That raised a new question: who else knew, and who had helped James conceal the crime for nearly 40 years? Of all the living Prices, only one remained directly related: Evan Price, James's son. Evan was born in 1986, meaning he could not have participated directly in the attack on Megan, but that did not rule out the possibility that he had been involved in the disposal, if James had forced him into any part of hiding the body, especially since forensics confirmed the remains had been moved and buried after the incident at Prairie Creek Trail. Under Texas law, any act of aiding concealing evidence or assisting in disposal, even if committed before age 17, can still be prosecuted if the consequences extend into adulthood, a complex legal point Maria had to consider. After a meeting with the county prosecutor, an arrest warrant for Evan Price was signed on the charge of accessory after the fact, serious level complicity in the disposal of Megan Hartley's body. When the SWAT team arrived at Evan's apartment early in the morning, the complex was still bathed in the pale light of dawn. Evan opened the door half asleep, but the moment he saw the handcuffs and Maria standing there, he instantly understood what was happening. "I already told you," Evan blurted out, his voice clearly shaking. "I don't know what he did." Maria didn't argue. "Evan Price, you are under arrest for aiding in the concealment of the Megan Hartley homicide, 1981. Once in the interview room, Evan's panic had shifted, no longer evasive or passively angry, as in previous meetings, but a slow collapse, the kind that happens when someone has run from a ghost of the past for too long, and knows they can't run anymore. Maria spread every piece of forensic evidence and photos across the table, hiding nothing. Megan's remains, the shirt fragment, soil analysis, and especially the DNA results proving James Price left traces on the green thread. Evan stared at it all like someone watching a memory film he had tried to bury in the darkest corner of his mind. After a long silence, he whispered, almost to himself, "I didn't think it would ever come back." Maria didn't push. She knew the hardest interviews open up when the person is confronted not with threats, but with the truth itself. His hands shook. Then finally he said, I didn't hurt her. But I saw my father do it." Maria kept her voice calm. "Evan, how old were you when this happened?" He swallowed hard, eyes wide as the memory flooded back. I think I was about 13. The number silenced the room. 13. Too young to fight a grown father, old enough to understand something horrific was happening. Evan continued, voice breaking, "I didn't see everything from the start. I just remember Dad pulling up in the old truck. He looked panicked. His shirt was covered in dirt, and when I walked around to the back of the truck, I saw someone's legs, a girl's." Maria didn't take notes right away. She let Evan speak at his own pace. "My dad yelled at me to get inside. He was always like that. But this time, he grabbed my arm, dragged me away, told me not to look." Evan paused, staring into space, as if rebuilding the buried memory. He said, "You wouldn't understand. I had no choice. But I knew he was lying." Evan said that after locking the old garage where James worked, James forced him into the truck. Evan didn't know where they were going, only that his father drove fast, then stopped at a spot near Lavon Lake. James made his son stay in the truck, but Evan saw through the foggy window his father dragging a heavy bundle to the ground, wiping sweat, looking around like he was afraid someone would see. He told me never to tell Mom, never to tell anyone. He said if I did, he would leave. And just a few months later, James did leave, disappeared without explanation, abandoning Evan and his mother to a lifetime of unanswered questions. Evan fell silent, hands cradling his head. I was just a kid. I didn't know what to do. I didn't dare speak. I thought if I ignored it, everything would disappear. Maria took a deep breath. This was not just a statement, it was the confession of a second victim who had carried invisible wounds for 38 years. Yet even if Evan had been coerced, he had still played a role in the disposal. Maria needed to determine voluntary assistance or forced. One truth, however, was now clear. James Price dragged Megan into the truck. James moved the body to Lavon Lake, and Evan, whether unwillingly, whether coerced, had witnessed that disposal. As Evan was led out of the room for a break, Maria knew a major chapter had closed, the chapter of the Price family's silence. But the hardest part still lay ahead, determining exactly what Megan had seen that night, and why what she saw cost her her life. The truth was rising, but it was not done. From Evan's broken testimony, from the forensics at Prairie Creek Trail, from the torn shirt fragment, from the soil analysis at Lavon Lake, and from the interrupted sentence on the 1981 911 tape, Detective Maria Vasquez began piecing together a picture no one had been able to complete for nearly 40 years. And as each piece fell into place, the night Megan Hartley vanished emerged clearly, as if a beam of light had cut through the fog James Price had tried to create. According to Evan, in 1981, James Price was not just a mechanic, he was also involved in illegal dealings buying and selling stolen auto parts, the kind of shady trade done in the dark corners of Richardson. Old rumors from the garage where James worked confirmed he associated with people described as untrustworthy, but back then no one paid enough attention to connect the dots. The night Megan disappeared, James went to Prairie Creek Trail to meet another man, a dark, quiet place with no cameras, and no one around after 10 p.m. Forensics proved the bend near the wooden bridge was where Megan was overpowered, and coincidentally, that same area was the shortcut James often used to walk home from the garage. That was the moment everything collided. Megan, walking home from the library, stepped right into a secret meeting James believed no one would witness. Megan, with the bright eyes of a 16-year-old, had no reason to suspect anything unusual, until the moment she looked up and saw James standing there, not as a passerby, but as a man exchanging something from the bed of his pickup. The sentence on the 911 tape, "She wasn't supposed to see me," now became the final piece that let Maria understand the original motive. Megan had seen James doing something no one was meant to see. She looked back twice, as witnesses reported. Perhaps she meant to walk away, or to run. The couple who saw a dark figure standing motionless, caught the moment James realized he was being watched. The teenager, who heard a short argument, heard Megan confront him. What happened next was reconstructed indirectly by forensics through the torn fabric. A violent yank, a brief struggle, then Megan dragged to the edge of the brush. Soil analysis showed Prairie Creek Trail dirt embedded deep in Megan's shirt, meaning she had fallen or been dragged to the ground there. With his hot temper and poor impulse control, the situation spiraled out of James's hands in seconds. There was no evidence of sexual assault, forensics found none, but enough to conclude she was strangled or tightly restrained until unconscious. James, in panic, believed Megan was dead, or beyond saving. In the typical reaction of someone who commits an unintended crime, instead of fleeing or seeking help, James called 911, a short trembling call. "She wasn't supposed to see me." But when the call was cut off, perhaps because James feared someone else heard, or realized he had just made a bigger mistake, he returned to the scene and dragged Megan into his truck. The torn shirt matched the dragging the elderly witness had unknowingly heard. The couple who heard noises they thought were wild animals, or breaking branches, were actually hearing James struggling with the body. After placing Megan in the bed of the truck, James drove straight to the old garage where he worked, as Evan described. When 13-year-old Evan opened the garage door and saw Megan's legs sticking out from under a tarp, that memory was seared into him for life. James, in extreme panic, yelled at his son and forced Evan into the truck. Evan had no choice. A child could not resist the father he had feared since childhood. James drove to Lavon Lake, a place he believed was remote enough, and where the soft lakeside soil would hide everything. Forensics proved the body was not buried deeply, a sign consistent with hasty disposal. No professional tools, no clear plan, just the desperate act of a man terrified of exposure. After burying Megan, James returned to the truck covered in dirt and sweat and told Evan, "You never tell anyone, ever." Evan, 13, terrified, shaking, could only nod. In many cases, minors forced to witness or participate in disposal become second victims, and Evan carried that burden for decades. A few months later, James left Richardson, left the family, left Texas altogether, and when resident records in 2002 showed no activity, it is very likely when James died, or deliberately vanished completely from the system, taking with him a secret he believed would never be unearthed. But James was wrong. The green thread, the torn shirt, soil analysis, bone DNA, voice print, and his own son's testimony reopened a story thought to be buried forever. For the first time, after 38 years, the timeline was clear. Megan Hartley was not randomly abducted. She did not get lost. She did not run away. She accidentally walked into the exact spot where James Price was conducting an illegal transaction, and saw something she was never meant to see, and in that moment, her fate was sealed. The investigation finally knew what had happened, but justice, even delayed, still had one more step to take. In 2024, nearly 4 decades after the night Megan Hartley vanished on Prairie Creek Trail, the case finally entered formal legal proceedings. James Price had long been dead and could not be tried, but Texas law does not allow anyone who participated in concealing a crime, even as a minor at the time, to escape responsibility when the consequences extend into adulthood. And the new forensic evidence, Evan's testimony, and the discovery of Megan's remains at Lavon Lake, formed a legal file strong enough to bring the case to trial. The trial was held at Collin County Courthouse, attended by the victim's family, media representatives, and Richardson residents, who had lived through the era when Megan's disappearance spread fear through the neighborhood. Evan Price walked into the courtroom looking hollow, no longer defiant or evasive, as in the early days of the investigation. He knew what was coming. The county prosecutor, who had taken the case determined to close the oldest cold case in her jurisdiction, presented a meticulous and rigorous forensic reconstruction, one that left the courtroom in total silence. She showed a model of Prairie Creek Trail in 1981, the exact spot where the green thread was found, where Megan's torn shirt fragment appeared, and the area at Lavon Lake, where the remains were excavated. On the large screen she displayed every forensic result: soil analysis matching the dirt on the shirt to the trail, bone DNA confirming Megan's identity with near absolute certainty, tear patterns on the fabric consistent with forceful dragging, and touch DNA on the green thread, matching 50% with Evan Price, proving the source was his father, James Price. The prosecutor continued with the voice print from the 1981 911 call, pointing out the 80% match to James's voice, and especially emphasizing the sentence, "She wasn't supposed to see me," as an inadvertent confession from the perpetrator in a moment of panic. But what took the courtroom's breath away was when the prosecution presented Evan's sworn testimony, not the one given to detectives, but the one he repeated under oath. Evan stood before the court, voice trembling, recounting the memory from when he was 13, seeing his father drag Megan's body, being forced into the truck, being made to stay silent, while James buried the girl near the shore of Lavon Lake. Though Evan's testimony was evidence against himself, it also revealed the truth that he had once been a child coerced into a horrific secret. Evan's defense attorney argued that Evan had no real choice, that he was a second victim of James Price, threatened and controlled, while still a minor. But the prosecution countered, stressing that even though Evan was only 13 at the time, He had remained silent for 38 years, never once coming forward to help solve Megan's disappearance, an act of silence that under Texas law was sufficient to constitute concealing a crime with serious consequences extending into adulthood. In the end, faced with the overwhelming weight of forensic evidence and his own testimony, Evan accepted a plea deal offered by the prosecution, pleading guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence and full cooperation in reconstructing the case. He pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence resulting in human death, the most serious legal version of accessory after the fact. Agreed sentence, 20 years imprisonment. When the judge read the sentence, Evan bowed his head, shoulders trembling slightly. He did not object, did not ask for leniency. Perhaps he had lived too long with fear and guilt to still have the strength to fight. In the gallery, Megan's family held each other, tears flowing, not from joy, but because the pain finally had an endpoint. None of them saw Evan as a monster. They saw him as part of the tragedy, a child forced into his father's darkness, now paying the price as an adult. But for the law, the truth could no longer be buried. Justice, delayed 43 years, had finally entered the courtroom with the sound of the symbolic gavel. And when the sentence was pronounced, the Megan Hartley case, the girl who vanished into the darkness in 1981, finally received its first legal conclusion. The truth had surfaced, the law had spoken, and the long-silent cold case had finally begun to thaw. When Evan Price's sentence was pronounced, and the final legal file on the Megan Hartley case was closed, Richardson PD held a press conference outside headquarters on a sunny June morning that felt somewhat like the days Megan once walked Prairie Creek Trail in 1981. On the podium, beside an enlarged photo of Megan, her 16-year-old smile forever young, Detective Maria Vasquez stood calmly, but her eyes could not hide the exhaustion mixed with relief after the long haunting journey. She looked at the row where Megan's family sat, then down at the reports in her hand. When the microphone turned on, she spoke the opening words everyone had waited 42 years to hear. Today we officially declare the Megan Hartley case solved. The statement was not loud or dramatic, but it carried the weight of nearly half a lifetime of waiting, searching, disappointment, and renewed hope. She continued, "We confirm that the direct perpetrator was James Price, deceased in 2002, and the individual who aided in the concealment, Evan Price, has pleaded guilty and been sentenced in accordance with the law." A reporter asked, "What was the biggest breakthrough in the case?" Maria paused for a few seconds. No one knew better than she did. She was the one who had turned every yellowed page, every scattered statement, every forgotten piece of evidence. Finally she answered, "One green thread." She held up an enlarged photo of the green fabric thread, the item so small it was almost meaningless in 1981, yet became the key that unlocked the entire truth. One thread left behind in the brush, near where Megan was last seen, Maria said, and for 4 decades, no one could do anything with it. But technology changed, touch DNA changed, and because of it, that thread led us to the Price family. The press scribbled furiously. Then Maria delivered her final sentence slowly, almost in a whisper, "No crime stays buried forever." From the torn shirt forensics, the soil analysis matching Prairie Creek Trail, the bone DNA identifying Megan, to the 80% voice print match of James on the 911 call, everything wove together into one long thread that pulled the case out of the darkness. A cold case thought destined to remain forever in a metal cabinet in Collin County had finally been solved, thanks to technology, the persistence of investigators, and one thread that nature had not swallowed in that night's rain. When the press conference ended, longtime Richardson residents came forward to place flowers at Megan's photo. Some had walked Prairie Creek Trail in the 80s, some had heard the rumors of the time, and some had never known Megan, but felt the pain her family had carried for 42 years. The mayor of Richardson spoke briefly. "We cannot bring Megan back, but we can give her and her family the truth." Megan's family held each other, no loud sobbing, just quiet tears, and the sad smile of a mother who finally knew where her daughter had lain for 4 decades. She took Detective Maria's hand and said, "Thank you for bringing my daughter home." Maria simply replied, "She was always here. We just found where she was sleeping." In Richardson, Prairie Creek Trail still stands. The streetlights have been replaced, the trees trimmed more neatly, but for those who know the story, the small bend near the wooden bridge will forever be the place where Megan's fate was decided, and where the long journey to find the truth began. And at Lavon Lake, where a thin layer of soil once hid a secret for nearly half a century, a small memorial plaque now stands quietly near the water's edge. In memory of Megan Hartley, 1965-1981. No flowers, no candles, just a simple plaque, fitting for Megan's life, quiet, unassuming, yet leaving a void far too large in the hearts of those who loved her. When the evening sun casts golden light across the lake, the water ripples gently like a whisper, and in Richardson, Detective Maria Vasquez's words are repeated as a final declaration: "No crime stays buried forever." In today's American society, Megan Hartley's story still carries special weight because it touches on issues modern Americans face every day: community safety, the importance of forensic technology, and moral responsibility when witnessing or knowing something wrong. The fact that Megan accidentally saw James Price in an illegal transaction is not just a personal tragedy. It shows that a single moment of carelessness in a familiar environment, like Prairie Creek Trail, which she had walked hundreds of times, can lead to danger. It reminds Americans that even the seemingly safest places require vigilance, especially for young people. The story also highlights the irreplaceable role of modern forensic technology: touch DNA from a thread forgotten for 38 years, soil analysis at Lavon Lake, voice print from a 911 tape, all delivered the turning point. In today's America, where thousands of cold cases still sit in storage, Megan's story reminds us of the value of science and investment in investigative infrastructure, because justice sometimes lies in the smallest details. And perhaps the biggest lesson comes from Evan Price, a 13-year-old forced to witness and stay silent. It shows the power and consequences of prolonged silence. In modern life, Americans are encouraged to speak up, report, seek help when something feels wrong, whether in the family, at school, or in the community. Silence can become complicity, not out of malice, but out of fear. Ultimately, Megan's story proves that American society, vast and complex as it is, still believes in one unchanging truth: no crime stays buried forever. And in real life, every American has a role in making that belief reality, by staying alert, building community, trusting science, and speaking the truth when it matters. Thank you for joining me on this 42-year journey to solve the case. If you found Megan's story worth reflecting on, please subscribe to keep following cold cases brought back to life by justice and science. See you in the next video, where we'll continue unraveling secrets thought forever, buried by time.